Good evening, everyone. Hope you are well this Thursday evening. My name is Alyssa Thomas from Penguin and Fish, where we make lovely and quirky hand embroidery patterns and kits. And I'm here every weeknight at 8:30 p.m. Central Time, where we relax and we craft and we work on a project together. And I'm going to take a little break from the norm today. We're going to have a little discussion today about color value. So value, the lightness or darkness of a color. We're going to discuss that a little bit today, and just so you guys can understand it a little bit more. I know you've asked about it, and we're going to dig into it today, and we're going to learn how getting a handle on value of a color can help us make better decisions when we are working on a quilt or choosing our fabrics for a quilt. So that is the plan for tonight. It might be a little shorter than usual tonight, but that is the plan. So thanks for coming in again for this little special deal tonight. And on Monday, we will pick up our project again. We are working on the Charming Chevrons quilt by Krista Watson of Krista Quilts. And tomorrow we will be having our Finish It Friday UFO day. So tomorrow, for one Friday every single month, usually it's going to be the first Friday, but I forgot last week. So the first Friday of every month, we are going to have a Finish It Friday, which is just a time where we stop the project that we're working on, and we're just going to go to one of our unfinished projects and pull that out and work on that for the hour. So that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow. I will be working on my hedgehog wall hanging, embroidered wall hanging. I have to just quilt the border of it still. So I'll be pulling that out and I'll be working on that. Oh, I know the Olympics are going to be on now too. I know, Sue. But tonight we are taking a break from all that. And again, we are going to discuss value in color. And there's a new tool that's out, and we're gonna play with that a little bit too. It is the Ruby Ruler by Blair Stocker of Wisecraft Quilts. So Blair, if you remember, we worked on her English paper piecing project. I made that pillow. It's kind of that pretty English paper piecing floral pillow. Oh, I made mine into a flower. You didn't have to make yours into a flower. But that is the same Blair Stocker. She now has this, what she calls the Ruby Ruler. It is a 5-inch ruler with this ruby tint, and we are going to talk about why that's important coming up here when we talk about value. So I'm going to flip you around. We're going to get started. I'm going to keep it pretty short, I think, tonight. Feel free to ask questions. Maybe wait till I'm done if you have any questions on value, because we will dig into it a little bit here. And then I'll let you get back to the Olympics. So, all right, guys, I'm going to flip you around. Thanks again for joining me tonight. All right, I got some crayons out here again. We're going to play with those tonight. So, all right, when we talk about value, color value, what we are really talking about is the lightness or darkness of a color, and more specifically, the lightness and darkness of a color as it relates to whatever's next to it. So why that's important for an artist or a quilter is because it will help define a form. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here. But so lightness and darkness of a color, that is what value is. And value is important because value defines form. So this is the big thing you want to remember. Value, the lightness or darkness of a color or pattern, defines form. Oh, and I can't spell. Oh man, there we go. Defines form. I'm a little dyslexic this evening, I guess. So, all right, and by form, I mean where you can see a definition of a shape next to another shape. And that is important for a quilter. Yeah, Gretchen. That's important for a quilter because like if you're working on a quilt and you have, let's say, a star in your quilt, and you finish your quilt and you can't see that star anymore, it's a bummer, right? You spent all that time making the quilt and you can't even see that special pattern, that star that you put into your design. And it's most likely because your value wasn't done well enough. You didn't understand value well enough. It wasn't as high contrast enough, basically. So value defines form. So here's an example of that. So, all right, this is one of my favorite quilt blocks. I'm going to zoom in a little. It's the log cabin quilt. So basically for a log cabin, you start in the middle and then you keep sewing strips around and around and around. So let's pretend we are sewing this, and I'm going to sew it. I'm going to use two different colors. I'm going to use a light and a dark color. So I'm going to use two different values. I'm going to use a dark value and a lighter value. So value, again, is the darkness or lightness of something. So if I'm sewing this, let's say I'm starting with that gray in the middle. Then let's do a dark color. We'll do another dark color this way. So log cabins, one of my most favorite quilt designs. But let's just keep going. We're just using the two colors right now. We're basically using two grays. One it has a dark value and one has a light value. Okay. So this is a typical log cabin quilt block. But you can see, obviously, we kind of have this triangle going now. We have a dark triangle up here and a light triangle down here. And the way that triangle is formed is because we're looking at the relationship of the dark value next to the light value. So because we're seeing them next to each other, we are now being able to define those triangles, right? So that's the two different values there. And by just moving those values around, we can totally change the design. Like, if we sew it this way, if we just have those values in a different spot next to each other, it defines the form differently. Right? So if we sew the strips in this way, it's fun to work with crayons again. So now, same two colors, really. It's still the gray, but the dark value and the light value we've moved around, and we've defined a different shape here now, right? So now we got these squares instead of this triangle, and we can tell the difference just because of the different values. We got a light value next to a dark value, making that square. So, all right, so I know I'm using just black and white right now, basically, or just some grays. But the same thing happens when you use color. So even though we're going to try that now. So we're going to use a bunch of color, but because we're paying attention to value, because we're paying attention to what's the dark value and what's the light value of those colors, because we're going to be doing the same thing, we're going to, no matter what color we use, we're still going to get this definition. We're going to still get this triangle defined. So, all right, we're gonna give that a try. So it doesn't even matter what color. And the real term for color is hue. So the hue of the color, hue meaning like the purple or the red. I'm gonna just find some dark hues and some light hues. Oh, that's kind of light. We'll put that on the light side. That's kind of light. Let's go like for sure light. Okay. That pink, that's pretty dang light. Let's put that in a light pile. This purple is kind of dark. Ooh, that's a pretty burgundy. So I'm using color right now, but you can do the same thing with fabric too, and we will definitely get to that. I want like a dark green in here. So this is kind of how we're doing this color here is kind of like how you would do a scrappy quilt, right? Because a scrappy quilt would be all sorts of different colors. So it's all about relativity though, right? Still. So even though this green's a little lighter compared to these, it's still much darker than our pink over here. So let's do this light pink. What other light colors can we find? Maybe a yellow. Oh yeah, there, that looks like it's light compared to these. Crayons. Ooh, there's a light green. Ooh, let's see what periwinkle does. Yeah, that's not quite as light, but all right, let's just choose these. So we got a couple light colors, and then let's use these dark colors. Yeah, so the pink is pretty light, but I'm gonna zoom in for you guys a little bit more there. So we're just gonna use this as an example. So let's pretend we're making a scrappy quilt. We're still gonna sew around and around like we would in a log cabin. But this time we're gonna use all sorts of colors. We're all sorts of hues. We're not gonna just do black and white like we did up here. All sorts of hues. So let's do a yellow strip here. Then we'll throw that pink in. Really pale pink. Did the same purple there, I guess. I'll throw a green up here. Let's throw that pink in again. This is kind of fun. So this is something you can do if sometimes a designer will give you a coloring sheet with the pattern, and that is to help you figure out what colors you want to do, but you can also use it to figure out value, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Let's use this green again. And this crazy pink again too. Okay, so even though we used all sorts of different colors, you can still kind of see the darkness of that square, or that triangle up there, right? And the lightness of this triangle. And it's just because this one is dark compared to this one, which is light, that we have that definition, right? So it's a little more subtle. Let me zoom out. It's a little more subtle than our dark black and our light gray, but you can still see it, right? So even from far away, it's even easier to see from far away. So yeah, that's the whole thing with value versus color. You might think, oh, having two opposite colors next to each other might really define a shape, but it's not going to do it as well as picking out the different value. So in this case, again, we did the darks over here and the lights over here. So I hope that helps a little bit, so you can see how the change in value can help you with a quilt. It is not so easy once you add color, add the hues, or if you add pattern and stuff, pattern of fabrics and stuff to a quilt. It's a little harder to start to detect what's a dark value and what's a light value, right? Like it gets a little sketchier, right? a little more difficult because you're a little distracted by the colors, you're distracted by the patterns. It's hard to tell. So one thing you can do is take a black and white photo. So if I was working on this quilt and I wanted to test these colors, I could take a black and white photo of this and see how what a black and white photo does is kind of isolates the values. It gets rid of the color, gets rid of the hue, and you only see the value. So if I would take a black and white photo of this, it would veer a little bit more to that. And actually what I'd probably find is, man, that green is maybe a little too light. I might want to use a darker green. So like if I had a darker green, I might replace it with a darker green. See, that's a little bit better. Now that green is a little bit closer to these darks and a little bit more contrasty to these lights. So that even defined our triangle a little bit better there. So you can take a black and white photo of what you're working on, but that's hard if you're like in progress and you're moving fabrics around a lot. Another thing you can do is squint. If you squint, it kind of deletes the color. The other thing you can do, and this is what artists use sometimes, they use a red filter. And that's what this Ruby Ruler is by Blair Stocker of Wisecraft Quilts. So here's how it comes with this cute little design here. But Valerie, I'll talk about that in a sec here. So what a Ruby Ruler does, it's kind of like taking a black and white photo. So you see here, I can see all the color here. Once I put the Ruby Ruler in front of it, look, it all of a sudden kind of turns into black and white. I mean, you know, it's got the red tinge, but all of a sudden it looks, you can really see the dark values of these colors and the light values of these colors. See, so this is without it. I'm distracted by all the color. You throw the red in front of it, and now it sort of just crunches it down just to the value. And it actually looks a whole lot more like this up here too, right? So a tool like this can be really helpful, like if you're digging through fabrics and you need to quickly determine, like if I was doing this as my design of my quilt, I can quickly determine, ooh, is this a lighter value or a darker value in relation to each other? I can see both piles at once and kind of put the lights over there and the darks over there. Yeah, if I wanted to make this into a quilt, you know, I have my bin of fabrics here. You can do the same thing. So if I hold this up, I can quickly pull out dark colors. So let's grab some dark colors. You know, this is clearly dark. All right, so this one's kind of dark. And then let's pull some, for sure, light colors. So this against everything else is light. So what I'm doing is I'm deleting the color, right? Because here, man, I'm seeing this red, I'm seeing this green, I'm just seeing everything, and I'm totally distracted. Like, is this darker than this? You know, I can't really tell, right? So if I put this up to it, then wow, this looks just a bit darker, doesn't it? And this is a bit lighter. It kind of turns it to grayscale. So I'm going to throw this. When in doubt, I'm going to throw this in my dark pile. I might actually throw this in a medium pile because if I look at it next to this one, oh, it's kind of equal. I think the Ruby Ruler kind of plays with red a little bit funny though, but I think it's looking a little lighter. So I'm going to throw these both in like a lighter pile. But yeah, so that's the kind of benefit of a Ruby Ruler. Again, you can do the same thing with a black and white photo, but so in theory, we can quickly organize our fabrics into our lights and our darks, and then the ones that are kind of in the middle, you know, those could be some medium colors. Maybe you need some medium colors for your quilt. So like this to this, one is dark and one is light. This to this one's lighter than this. So it depends depends kind of how you want your quilt to look. If you want it high contrast, you would do like really light colors next to really dark colors. There we go, like this. We'll get rid of these medium ones. There, now you have a quilt where the white is really going to pop against these darks, right? But you might not want it to be that dark or that high contrast. So maybe you throw a little bit lighter next to it. So now we have, these are still, if you compare these two, this is the dark and this is the light. But if you compare these two, now this is the light and this is the dark. So you always have to compare it to the other colors. But if I want a subtler quilt, like I don't want quite so poppy of a star, let's say as this white, I can do maybe this a little lighter blue. It's lighter than this, so I'm going to have that contrast of value still. So that's how you can dig through your scraps using your ruby ruler to just quickly divide your scraps up. All it really does is it kind of cancels out the color and makes it easier just to see value, because the value is what's going to define your form, right? So that is value. Let me know if you have any questions about it. It really, compared to the other aspects of color, value is really the thing that defines a shape the most. So the other aspects of color would be hue. And the hue, again, is what color is it? Is it red or is it green? That's the hue. Value is how light or dark it is. And then saturation. Saturation is different than value. Saturation is how much purity a color has. So if, like for example, let's just look at, I'm using some pretty highly saturated colors. So there, for my quilt, they are just bright colors. If it was less saturated, so like a duller color, it would have a whole lot more gray in. So let's just kind of let's see if I can find an example. Oh, there we go. That's a pretty saturated color here. Let's zoom into that. Oops, sorry guys. We're doing all the color stuff today. So that's a pretty saturated color, meaning this is, there's nothing dulling this color down. So if we added, I'm just going to add a little gray to the top of it. I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm just trying to dull it down, but that's not really working well. Let's try another color. Actually, you can kind of dull it down with an opposite color too. Ooh, I broke my crayon. All right, so saturation doesn't have anything to do with lights or darks. It has to do with how pure or dull a color is. So you can kind of think of like a brown is a dull orange, basically. Let's just look at that. So here's orange. Brown is basically just a dulled down orange. So it doesn't have as much pure color as this orange has. And same with like this blue that I just made. So this is a pretty bright blue. As we add gray to dull it down, it just doesn't have the vibrancy, the pop of what this blue does over here. So that's what saturation is. It's not quite the same as value, where it's just how light or dark a color is. If you take a photo of it, you can clearly see the lights and darks. Same with this. You can clearly see the lights and the darks. That's value. That's what's going to define a quilt more than anything, more than how dull or light the colors are, or whether it's green or red. You know what I mean? So that is that's value right there. So, all right, guys, I'm going to flip you around. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll talk about it a little bit here. All right, guys. So I know it was kind of like a little quick overview tonight. We'll be discussing this a lot more in the future, I think. It's definitely something helpful to make a quilt. We can actually just look at this charming chevrons quilt here too. So if we're looking at her background quilt here, let's look at it through the ruby ruler once. So if we're looking at the background fabric, or the quilt in the back, you can really see how dark these stripes are. Like, she picked this pretty blue, this dark blue color for the back of her quilt. Every other zigzag is this dark blue. Krista on purpose, picked colors that were lighter in value than this dark blue. And the reason she did that is she wanted to have that high contrast. She wanted to have that contrast of the lighter colors against the dark blue, because then you can see the zigzags better. Like, even if you're this far away, you can still see those dark zigzags against those light zigzags. So if you've been with me here for me making this quilt, this is kind of what I'm worried about, because I did not look at value very well. I did not on purpose pick a high contrast value. Like, I did not on purpose pick a really dark for the background and a really light for the foreground. So my zigzags, when I'm done with my quilt, are not going to be as well defined as these ones are. So they're going to be less high contrast, basically. The background between the foreground, it's going to be more closer together in value, which is fine. It's just not going to, from far away, you might not see the high contrast zigzags. So that's going to be just how my quilt looks. But you can tell she on purpose picked lighter value colors for her foreground fabrics. And she kind of did the opposite here. She's got a lighter background with darker patterned zigzags in front. So that really helped define those zigzags. And so if you're working on a quilt and you really want something defined, like if you have, like what I was saying before, if you have a star in the middle of your quilt and you really don't want to lose it, or like a little house block or something, and you don't want to lose the house on the background, it might not be enough to have like a blue background and a red house. If those are too close in value, like the lights and darks of it, if you look through it on the ruby ruler and they're too close, you might not be able to tell that there's that house on there, even though the colors are totally different. But if you have a really light pale blue and then a rich deep red, like a burgundy, then that's just going to pop because you're paying attention to the value a little bit more. Or like a dark little tree against a light sky. That's going to define it more than color. So I hope that was a little bit helpful. I know it's a lot to take in, all this stuff about color, especially when you start looking at art books and there's color wheels and all this other stuff going on. I'm hoping that this helped kind of break down a little bit more the basics of value. Value is the biggest thing you can look at if you really want to define a shape in what you're working on. So next time you're working on a quilt, think about value, and then after that, play around with your colors and patterns and that. But yeah, value first. So, all right, guys, thanks again for joining me tonight. If you have any more questions, let me know. You can ask them here, and I'll try to respond in the comments, or you can ask them over in the Penguin and Fish Crafters group if you have an example that you need help on, working on the value of it. Let me know. We'll take a look at it. And I hope that helps a little. And tomorrow I will be back. We're going to have the Finish It Friday, the little day off of our normal project, and we try and work on one of our unfinished projects for one time a month, one day a month. So that is the plan. Have a great evening. And if you're still confused, feel free to ask any questions at all. I know this is live, so it's maybe a little goofy, but I hope it helped a little bit. And be sure to check out that ruby ruler too. It's really, really helpful. Like you can even hold it up to anything here to help to find value. Oh, thanks, Patricia. All right, guys, have a great evening. I will see you tomorrow again at 8:30 p.m. Central Time for our normal hour-long crafty time. Good night.